I'm a hair mineral analysis expert. I have a background in functional medicine, and I educate people using HTMA testing to maximize health, erase debilitating symptoms, and gain energy. I'm a multi-time kettlebell sport world champion, and I'm constantly searching for high-performance pros from all over the world to bring you this human optimization podcast. My name is Lisa Pitel-Killah. Welcome, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. And I'm so excited to have here with us to share today Dr. John Kim. He is the owner and pharmacist in charge of Robinson Drug and Compounding Center. Dr. Kim is an advocate for healthy and alternative functional medicine, and his specialties include bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, women's health, vector-borne illness, nutrition, and cannabis medicine. With potential FDA overreach in the area of compounding hormones, Dr. Kim is here today to discuss the role of compounding pharmacies that they can play in the lives of patients seeking to live healthier. Welcome to the show, Dr. Kim.
Lisa, thank you so much. It's an honor to be in your podcast. And just want to let the audience know, we actually changed our name just recently. It's no longer Robinson Drug. We actually updated our name to Robinson Wellness Pharmacy. So we're focusing more on the wellness aspect of it instead of just dispensing drugs. So I think the overall model dealing with just regular dispensing has really come to an end. And what, as healthcare professionals, especially pharmacists, we have to really focus on wellness and changing the overall outcome for the patients, and especially talk about hormones as a great piece of tie in together.
Absolutely. And that name change completely resonates with everything that you do with regards to implementation for clients. So I think that that is fabulous. And so give us a little background on you. I mean, you've obviously have there's so many things that you've done and that you focused on. And even with regards to the American Academy of Anti-Aging, tell everyone a little bit more about you and about your background.
Absolutely. So my name is Dr. John Kim. I'm a clinical pharmacist as a compounding pharmacist, and been in this profession for almost 16 years now. I also own a wellness-based alternative integrated pharmacy in New Jersey here, and I've been a pharmacy owner for about 9 years. The funny thing is that the pharmacy has been here in town for 151 years. So we have a very long tradition that we've been going in terms of dispensing medications and helping the community. But as you know, time changes, our profession also has to change and focus on what is really important in patients' lives. And so for the last, especially 5-6 years now, we've been really concentrating on the wellness aspect of it, providing bigger detail in terms of patients' consultation and well-being, and managing some of the complex disease states such as autoimmune disorders. Hashimotos, one of the things that I really love to teach patients how to treat themselves. And so my belief is that the doctor of the future is you, that you have to be empowered in looking at, because a lot of times some of the doctors that we think that is able to help us, and they do, unfortunately, in terms of the complexity of autoimmune disorders and maybe lifestyle-based issue that patients having when you're actually dealing with an autoimmune disorder, a lot of the conventional Western medicine is not really cutting it. And so alternative functional medicine approach could be a better way to do so. So this is what we do at our pharmacy, and as well as, I have a very good following right now on Instagram that we're trying to help patients out that way. So it's been an exciting portion of it. However, for the last 15 years of my profession, I've been a compounding pharmacist as well. So compounding deals with customized medication for patients' needs. So when you are, let's just say, allergic to certain dyes or certain fillers, that we could end up having to take it out and really make it to your, makeup, right? So dealing with your allergies or certain genetic issues that you may have, we could really tailor that therapy for you. And that's actually very important for kids dealing with autism spectrum, autoimmune again, where you may end up having to be sensitive to gluten or casein or certain dyes. And then you're dealing with hormone therapy right now, which is a very hot topic in dealing with age management. Maybe, we have female patients going through menopause where conventional hormone replacement therapy is not really cutting it because it's all cookie cutter approach it's not really taking care of your needs. So this is where the compounding portion comes through, that we are able to really provide a customized approach and making you feel better. And you could take it for a short period of time, a long period of time, really depends on your personal goal. And this particular hormone therapy can be applied to men as well, where customized testosterone therapy can be very helpful for andropause. So it's been an exciting time where a lot of these things are really coming to play. And people with the power of social media, they're getting a lot more savvy in terms of looking at what's right, what's working out for them, and we're here to help.
Yeah, and you're right. And social media really is a great place to share all of this information, because there's so many people out there searching, whether they are going through menopause or andropause, whatever they're dealing with, they are becoming a lot more savvy, and they're doing a lot of their own research.
Absolutely.
And so let's go down a little further down that road, because I think, hormone replacement therapy, again, when you talk about that bioindividuality, is really important. And so let's dive a little bit deeper into that and how people really can use that towards anti-aging.
Yeah. So, as we end up having to hit our, let's just say, mid-20s, especially for female patients, at age of 25, they end up having to peak. I mean, just talk about DHEA, for instance, dihydrotestosterone, epinephrine, excuse me. That in itself is a precursor to testosterone, which also becomes a precursor for estrogen as well. That particular hormone actually peaks around age of 25, and it starts to, decrease as you start aging. And when you're dealing with overall lifestyle issues such as stress, you talk about inflammation, maybe your overall hormones are being affected because of a particular pregnancy you actually had, or something along that line, that in itself can be huge detriment in terms of your overall mental health, your overall well-being, your metabolism, how your overall your intimacy life could be, as well as muscle mass, right? So a lot of these things are all interconnected with hormone. We are always not thinking about these hormones because we're like, it's just aging. It is true, it is part of aging, but we could also enhance our overall hormone function by replacing them or enhancing the overall hormones in your body to really give you the benefit, and as well as increasing your quality of life. Because what's the whole point of aging when you're 50 to 60, you barely could move, or if you're not able to enjoy your life, or maybe you're not able to, have the overall intimacy that you need and have with your spouse and be satisfied. And so these are things that we could potentially do early on, and looking at these things to a point in just how do we prevent, and although you're going to age, but how do we end up having to prevent the overall biological age instead of the chronological age, right? This is the key thing that I end up having to mention about in my Instagram page, that people think that we just age. That's fine. That's all true and all. But what is your biological age versus what is your chronological age? Because I'm 40 right now, but I definitely don't feel 40, because all the necessary things that I try to do and, try to teach everybody as well. But if you're 40, I've seen my friends as well, they're hitting their 40 and then they start to develop this huge gut, metabolism end up having to slow down, and they start to age very, very quickly. It's because your overall biological clock's being affected. And I think that's the biggest difference between people who are healthy and who are not, who are vibrant, who are also completely sedentary. And these are things that we need to really look at, and that also affect your quality of life. Again, you want to enjoy your life. You don't want to be in pain or, suffering because you're not able to do certain things that you used to do.
Exactly. And, it's funny you mentioned 40, because I'm getting closer to 50 than 40, and same thing. And that statement, and I know for those of you watching who, have watched a lot of my episodes, that is my biggest, don't ever tell me that you're just getting older, because that is the biggest crock ever. It's like, get off the couch, get to the gym, eat better, drink more water, look a little deeper into your health, because you shouldn't feel like you need to say, well, it's just because I'm getting older. There's always so many different things that we can do to be able to enhance how we're feeling and how we're moving. And inflammation is a huge one. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Your lifestyle in general can drive inflammation that can stem all of these issues that you were just touching on with regards to, the sedentary lifestyle, not getting to the gym, gaining that weight. All of those things can affect that and can stem from inflammation.
Absolutely. Inflammation is the root cause of all diseases, if you think about it, right? And inflammation in itself, I mean, end up having to majority of times starts within the gut, because the gut lining in itself, you have a leaky gut and you're dealing with the LPS, which is called lipoprotein saccharides, having to cause additional inflammation. So there's a micro-inflammation that's going on within the gut, and you have a whole triggering of cytokines and everything else goes on. And so where does it start? So overall, it starts from the lifestyle that we end up having to choose: what you eat, what you drink, how you end up having to detoxify, how you poop, how you sleep. Overall, all of those things are determining factor for your overall inflammation that you end up having to control, and what kind of life you're going to be leading, right? So in your 20s and 30s, yeah, you could go out and party like you wouldn't believe. And I've done that as well. But the thing is, it's going to catch up to you at one point. And then, disease, it just doesn't happen overnight. It happens for many years, that you have that overall microinflammation that I just mentioned before, which is leading cause of a lot of problem that we end up having to see. And especially with COVID happening right now, many people, especially Americans, are dealing with this type of microinflammation that we already had. And then basically COVID was a kerosene to the fire, just blew everything up and really showed how unhealthy people are. And people are just being in fear because they realize that how unhealthy they are, or they don't know they're going to survive a particular infection of that nature. And these are things that are being really an eye-opening moment for Americans and people in general. And you know what? These are things that we could take charge now and change. And so one of the things I've really said for the last 2 years is that it's all about your lifestyle. It's all about how you control what you eat, how you sleep, how you poop, and how you think, and how you take care of your stress as well. Stress is another biggest component of inflammation. So these are things that we could do to not just about potentially having a lesser issue dealing with COVID, but in just life in general, just to manage your inflammation and also aging correctly, right? These are things that we could definitely do and take charge of it. And we need to do it now. We need to do it early. And if you are a young 20-year-old that are listening right now, don't make the mistakes that I did or some other people did, but take in charge now and make those right changes at this point. And you could definitely enjoy your life, because what's the whole point of actually having kids and then you're not able to do the daily activities to enjoy with your kids, right? So exactly. So that's the things that I always encourage people to do.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Something that really stuck out, and you mentioned it twice, and let's say it's not always comfortable for people to talk about pooping, but oh my gosh, it is. So you have no idea how many clients will come and they'll start with me, and it will be, well, I have a bowel movement, every other day. And sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's once a week. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Oh no.
Right. So because we have to get rid of the waste, right? We have to keep all of that moving and that flowing. And that's such an important factor that people are beginning to think that that's, for lack of a better word, normal. And it's not normal to only have a bowel movement every other day or once a week. That isn't normal. I really want people to understand that, because that can be so detrimental with regards to proper aging and what's happening in the body, just in general.
Proper aging is one. You're talking about bowel movement as the biggest factor in terms of detoxing. I don't care what kind of biohacking you do. I don't know what kind of sauna you buy or whatever you do. I mean, I have a sauna as well. I did it this morning for 30 minutes, but unless you're pooping regularly, I mean, I try to tell people, if you're not pooping 1 or 2 times a day, you're not doing it well. And then also it's the quality of the poop as well.
That's true.
It is.
It's so true. Yeah. You have to you have to have that nice, satisfying, well-developed bowel movement that's comfortable. We don't want too much of the other way where it's diarrhea, right? We don't want too much of the other way where you're straining. You just want it right in the middle. It's kind of like that, the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? It's got to be just right. It's got to be just right.
Just right. So those are the things that I mentioned about it, how you poop, when you poop and how much you poop is one of the things that really have to factor in, because that in itself shows you how well your overall digestive function is. And I mentioned just before, like not even 5 minutes ago, that your overall inflammation starts within the gut, called leaky gut issues. And you have different microbiota you end up having to deal with, including a thing called lipoprotein saccharide, which is a gram-negative bacteria, can cause severe inflammation. You have, and then you're dealing with C. diff, you have yeast, and different pathogens like parasites at the same time. So, parasites are a much more complex matter that we could probably touch upon some other time, but you overall have to look at these things that, hey, you know what, you need to have the daily bowel movement to get my gut in health, at least gut in check. And then what we could have to focus on also is what you put into your body to feed those good bacteria, because your gut microbiota end up having to dictate how you feel, how your overall mental function is including concentration, and also dealing with your immune system as well. Because in dealing with autoimmune disorder, it just didn't happen overnight. Those particular issues that you are developing now, especially Hashimoto's, that could have been checked 10 years before, looking at different lab markers, and also looking at how your overall gut function is and your microbiome, and trying to decrease that inflammation. You could do that and you could reverse those particular diseases. I've seen people do it. I've seen other doctors do it as well. And so these are the things that we really have to focus on when you are starting any type of disease state management through a so-called functional medicine, the root cause medicine, by looking at the gut in itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so I do want to touch on, I think one of the biggest things that sometimes a lot of people miss, and I think it's because, a lot of them, we're not getting all of the blood work that we need to make the assessment, right, when it comes to autoimmune. And one of the most common ones that's either completely missed, in any type of diagnosis or review, is Hashimoto's. Right. And because we're not getting all of the information that is actually needed to be able to make that assessment. And so let's talk a little bit about thyroid and Hashimoto's and kind of some of the markers that are important for people to understand what that actually looks like.
Yeah. So Hashimoto, well, let's talk about thyroid in general. I think there's such a underdeveloped understanding of how a thyroid panel should be ordered.
Yeah.
Because when you go to your internist or even your endocrinologist, what do they check for? TSH, thyroid stimulant hormone.
Yeah.
It's just not enough, right? That's only looking at the shadow, if you want to call it, very simply put, is a shadow of how your overall thyroid function is going. It's basically showing you a negative effect on the hormone to shut it down, just in case if you are having a hyperactivity of your thyroid hormone. But that doesn't really show anything else beyond that, right? You also have to look at how your T4 and T3, so T4, if you want to consider that an inactive hormone, a thyroid hormone, and then T3 as a active thyroid hormone, you have to look at the ratio as well as a breakdown of it and how T4 is converting to T3. So inactive hormone to an active hormone.
Yeah.
That's all depending on iodine, selenium. Those are type of nutrients and cofactors you need as well. But if you're only looking at TSH, how am I as a clinician able to determine if you are able to convert your hormones correctly is one. And secondly is, are you having nutritional deficiency? Yeah. So these are things that we have to look at as well. And then you're looking at the free T4, T3. So free meaning that these are thyroid hormones that are now not bound to certain albumin or certain protein carriers in the blood. And so you have to look at the overall bioavailable T4 and T3. So bioavailable, meaning that your body is able to utilize those hormones that are not clamped into certain carrier, right? If you are, let's just say, if you want to be free, you can't be handcuffed. But basically, those carriers are handcuffed with these hormones from doing and going to certain receptors that you really need to go to. So
Mhm.
these are things that really have to look at. Also looking at total T4, T3, right? These are thyroid hormones that are handcuffed basically, right?
Right.
And then you have the reverse T3. Reverse T3 is also important because that also negatively impacts your overall thyroid hormone due to, you guessed it, inflammation, also dealing with stress, right?
Yeah.
Certain foods, certain medications, right, can also cause reverse T3, especially beta blockers, can also affect your thyroid hormones. So I'm a big component of looking at how drugs are being interacted with some of the nutrition and as well as some of your health as well. So there's a whole term. It was actually coined by Dr. James Lavelle, who was also a pharmacist and a naturopath years ago. Oh, gosh, literally 25 years ago. But now much more pharmacists are getting into the functional medicine front and realizing that, hey, you know what? We're not really helping our patients by dispensing medication. So we have to focus on something called drug-induced nutritional depletion. So some medication can actually overall affect your thyroid function as well. So these are the important factor that we have to look at. And then you have something called thyroid peroxidase. So looking at thyroid antibodies, which is also important as well.
Yeah.
Which is also, I keep saying also because it's like adding after all these things, is that these antibody numbers are not being checked correctly or are completely ignored, or telling patients that, hey, you know what, it's just elevated. We had no other means to control it. So we'll watch and see. And then if it comes to a point that if we need to, we have to do some other interventions, which is a wrong approach of doing it. And it's actually affecting a lot of females, right? Hashimotos end up having to affect a lot of females. There's an interconnection between hormone, something called estrogen, and how that's related to autoimmune disorders. So your hormones are the next part that we'll talk about. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are not being done correctly because of misunderstanding overall hormone. And and also insurance companies, a big factor, which they're not willing to pay for certain numbers of factors you're looking at.
100%. And that's where I find a lot of clients will run into that with their MDs. If they're working with an MD as well, is when we're trying, because we're in Canada, right? So, you go through a medical doctor to get the blood work. There's other means that we have to do that as well. But a lot of times they'll be like, well, that's not necessary. Well, that's not necessary, right? So it's hard to get all of the information when we can't convince them of the whole picture, especially with antibodies. They're like, oh, you tested for them 10 years ago and they were fine. There's no reason for us to test them again. That's completely untrue. You've changed a lot in that decade. Maybe you went through menopause at that point. A woman at a certain age went through menopause. I mean, your body's totally different. And, we see that all the time. And it's not that they have to be tested multiple times a year, but they definitely need to be tested once in a while to make sure that they stay on track. So I think that that's really important. And so we've got a little bit more time. Let's talk about, that one size fits all. That really doesn't apply. And so going back to thyroid, you said, especially with women and their changing hormones, this can be a bigger problem for women when it comes to thyroid insufficiencies and imbalances. And so let's touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, two things I forgot to mention when you're doing a thyroid panel, you also have to look at your vitamin D level. So 25 hydroxy and how that's affected. If you have a level less than 40 or so, you are having a more likely chance of actually having your autoimmune issue being developed much greater time. And as well as the fact that you're dealing with the fact of not converting well. So you need to have an optimum vitamin D level for proper thyroid conversion. You also have to look at ferritin level. So stored iron is another big factor we have to look at. So iron is also a factor in terms of your thyroid gland. And so if you're low thyroid, then you should also look at your iron level. And so these are things that are not being missed. And I mean, one of the things we have to understand is that these are easily ordered when we're doing our routine blood work. But again, it's the misunderstanding of it. And even for me, when I talk to my internist, I specifically had to tell them that, you know what, can you just run these numbers for me? These are things that they don't even, I'm 40 right now, they won't even check for testosterone level or sex hormone binding globule or estrogen level, because it's not being asked, because it's not routine matter they only look at. They only look at the cholesterol, and even cholesterol wise is not complete either. They're only looking at LDL and HDL, right? Why aren't you looking at the overall density profile of the lipids, also ApoB or something on that line, to look at inflammation and how that's actually being developed? So all those things should be done. But again, is the education is the biggest factor that I look at, and as well as I think the practitioners are just too busy just to get through certain amount of numbers and certain data just to get the patients out of the office. I think that's another issue as well. So it doesn't really help anybody, nor is it helping anyone who's actually suffering Hashimoto, right? Because you have to look at not just the TSH and thinking that, yes, is elevating, but why is it elevating? Is it the cusp in terms of your overall point where your thyroid glands are completely destroyed and your TSH is increasing? And then if so, what else you can be looking at? Because people who suffer from Hashimoto's, they end up having to develop into other autoimmune disorders, right? IBS, also colitis. You're talking also about, what else is there? Psoriasis. You know, those are the common things that end up having to be interconnected with people dealing with Hashimoto's when they're not being controlled well enough. And why is there such a high rise of autoimmune disorder now versus what it was 50 years ago, right? And then you're talking about I think the first case of Hashimoto didn't really be recorded until the early 19th century, the early development of all these industrial things happening. So it is most likely connected with man-made environmental issues that's actually causing the body to have an imbalance of the hormones. But these are things that we should be looking at, but it's not. And who's suffering? Patients are suffering, right? And then doctors who think that they're doing the best they can, which they're doing, but they're not going to the root cause matter. Look at the gut, looking at the overall nutritional panel, and potentially particular pathogens, which can also cause a lot of issues as well, such as parasites and Lyme's and Bartonella infections. Those are something that I could name in terms of how that's affecting the thyroid. So these are things that should be looked at, but we're not, because it's always a one-side approach in terms of just dispensing medication and be done with, because a lot of times that's how practitioners are reimbursed by the insurance companies. And you talk about Canada, that's socialized medicine right there to begin with. So I don't know how it is there, but from talking to my colleagues, a lot of patients are seeking for that customized approach and looking at functional medicine and willing to pay for the right care they need.
I think it's definitely changing here now too. I think there's a lot of movement towards, again, just a more savvy person. They're taking control of their health in a more proactive fashion, and they're looking for alternatives. And, you know, I kind of want to finish off with one more question, because I think it is really important, and you kind of touched on it a bit. And one of the biggest biases coming right now with regards to compounding pharmacies is because it's going to limit, if that happens, right? If the overreach of certain organizations end up limiting that, not only is it going to limit the functional medicine guidance and that root cause medicine guidance that clients can get, but also what doctors can offer to their patients too.
That is correct. So when you're dealing with a certain therapy, you have to look at, and this is more developing on my end for the last 5 years, that we cannot be just dispensing medication and thinking that that's going to be the end of it all, right? Because everybody's makeup is very different, and that also goes hand to hand with hormone therapy, especially thyroid at the same time. So these are very important factors that not many pharmacies are able to take care of the patients for. And this is where the compounding pharmacies end up having to come through with their training, and as well as the expertise behind the disease states and looking at these things. And formulation wise, we bring forth that expertise to help these patients and getting the overall treatment they need. It could be functional medicine, it could be that, but you know, these are things that pharmacies been a compounding pharmacy has been able to provide for the last 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So it's been really good. The issue is that there's always the upper echelons who wants to control what is right and what is wrong. And that's actually happened to be a lot more issue during COVID. I can't really go into that too much, but it also details what kind of control they want to provide to prevent some of the customized hormones being given to patients, because they find that is not safe and effective, even though there is a good amount of data and providing that. And as well as the fact that there's a lot of interplay between the lobby groups by the manufacturer side who wants to prevent that as well, because there's not much things actually happening in the pipeline, and more there are newer dosage forms of natural hormone therapy that's being manufactured by the manufacturers to get that out. And there's money to be made, but then also those therapies are not going to be taking care of the rest of the population. They need the customized therapy, right? Depending on how the person's makeup is, their metabolism, depending on what kind of disease that they're going through, especially their gut function is very poor. And just give me an example is that topical estrogen may not be suited for all those people, right? So if a particular OBGYN have understanding that, hey, if you're having hot flashes, you're going to just give you a estrogen patch, is that going to do anything? Absolutely not. It's going to cause more hot flashes. It's going to cause more bloating and having to have a issue that's not going to be fixed from the get-go. So we have to look at different ways to providing different dosage forms. Maybe you have to look at the gut function, and then on top of proper metabolism of certain hormones that we could provide. And this is where the expertise of the compounding pharmacist comes through. And then as well as looking at alternate dosage forms, looking at maybe progesterone cream or progesterone capsules, including these progesterone lozenges that the patient might be able to take that could, make a humongous difference in the patient's lives, because, everybody's different. Just because, topical may end up having to work well for one patient may not be suited for the patient who's going through, who's having insomnia, where you need a progesterone capsule to deal with that, because when you're taking progesterone orally, it metabolizes to something called 17-alpha-pregnenolone to help to positively affect the GABA receptor to help you relax and fall asleep. So these are things that are not being looked at by the manufacturer, nor is clinicians anyway. And this is where the pharmacist comes through to make those necessary recommendations and changes for the patient's outcome.
And so I want to thank everybody. If you're here watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to my channel. We have a brand new episode every single 2 weeks, and give us a thumbs up if you're listening on your favorite podcast host, to make sure you give this episode a like. And Dr. Kim, thank you so much for sharing all of that wisdom today. I think that there's a lot that can be taken from everything that we discussed, and hopefully that proactivity for health and that customization is something that resonates with our listeners and our viewers. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's show. Head over to LisaPitel-Killah.com to gain access to some amazing free resources that will help you gain energy, erase debilitating symptoms, and be the best version of you. Remember to give this podcast a like and follow me on social media at Lisa Pitel-Killah. I'm here every 2 weeks with a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. Until next time.